there's a strange kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on the surface. It's, it's not the kind of tiredness that earns sympathy or sparks concern. It's the quiet fatigue of being everyone's space that's safe, while yourself having nowhere to land. See, we know this feeling well, right? We're the ones that people open up to when their lives are crumbling. We're the late night phone call, the reassuring text, the warm presence who listens without judgment. We absorb it all, from the grief to the rage and panic and shame, and we hold it gently and we respond thoughtfully. We make it easier for others to feel human again. And yet we often walk away empty, not resentful necessarily, but quietly hollow, because no one really asks us if we're okay. No one lingers when we start to fall apart. We're the emotional landing pad, the runway for everyone else's turbulence. When we need to be caught, there's just air. And that pain doesn't always show up. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it doesn't scream, but it lives deep in the body. It builds with every conversation where we nod and affirm, and even as our insides twist with unspoken needs. And this is where so many of us live, between gratitude that people trust us and grief that they don't stay. See, it's easy to mistake this kind of dynamic as just being a good friend. But let's name it for what it often becomes, and that's this one-sided emotional transaction. A pattern where we become containers for other people's pain, but ours often goes unseen. A pattern that eventually strips away intimacy and replaces it with performance, where usefulness becomes our currency for connection. And beneath that, something even more vulnerable. And that's a question that we're often too afraid to ask outright, and that is, would they still want me if I wasn't so helpful? See, that question isn't shallow, it's actually quite foundational. It reveals something crucial about our story, that we may have actually learned being emotionally available is the only way that we're allowed to belong. That caretaking is this price of entry, and that we're really giving and listening and supporting and smoothing things just so that we're tolerated. And maybe in the process we can be loved. But if we take that away, if we stop softening and absorbing every edge, we're not sure if anyone would stick around. And that doubt isn't imaginary. It's, for many of us, it's been tested. See, the moment that we set boundaries, the moment we asked to be seen, the moment that we expressed our own needs, people pulled back and discomfort crept in, and some relationships just dissolved. And so we learned to smile through the pain, to show up again and again, even when it cost us. Because the alternative, which is being alone, was far too terrifying a consideration. But here's the problem. This kind of connection is not intimacy. It's asymmetry. It's being close while you're being consumed. And when that becomes the norm, it doesn't just hurt, it hollows you out. So we lose touch of our own needs and our own emotions and even our own identity. Because when you're constantly making room for others, well, there's no room left for you then. See, this isn't just a personal dilemma. It's quite cultural, I would say. We live in this world that romanticizes selflessness, and it praises those who give endlessly and absorb silently and never make it about themselves, especially if we've been socialized and taught that our worth comes from being agreeable or generous or unfailing. Women often see that, don't they? We're expected to be soft but not messy, caring but not needy, strong but not burdened. And we're taught to be safe harbors even when we're sinking. And so we adapt And we learn to manage pain by fixing others. We learn to distract from our own pain by attending to the needs of others. And we learn to feel valuable when we're needed, even when we're never chosen. But at some point, this survival strategy begins to feel suffocating. And what once gave us the sense of purpose now begins to feel a lot like a cage. And this is when the cracks begin to form. See, we start to notice how many conversations are really one-sided. We realize that few people are asking how we're doing. And we become very aware of the difference between being loved for our support and being loved for our true selves. And so we begin to wonder, is this connection deep and meaningful, or is this just service? Is this friendship, or is this just emotional labor? Is this closeness or just proximity? Proximity to someone else's pain. See, when we're constantly the ones who are holding space for others, we start to confuse compassion with overfunctioning. And what began as care now becomes compulsion. And we feel responsible for the moods and the needs and the outcomes of people around us. Their emotional well-being becomes this unspoken job description on our end. And we get really good at this. So good, in fact, that most people never notice the toll that it takes on us. But deep down, we do. We notice. We notice the hesitation before we text a friend about our hard day. We notice how often we soften our own feelings so that we don't burden anyone else. We notice how we downplay our sadness and laugh off our anger, and we keep our stories short and succinct so that they don't take up too much space elsewhere. We notice that we're rarely the ones crying in someone else's arms. See, there's a loneliness that grows inside this kind of a dynamic. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who see only us in the roles that we perform, not as these full and messy and beautiful human beings, but as support beings. We're steady and silent and supposedly strong. And that identity can become quite addictive because being needed, it feels important. And being indispensable feels like you're wanted. And being the one that everyone turns to feels like connection, until it doesn't. Until it becomes clear that no one's really turning towards us. This is where intimacy starts to erode. Not through conflict or cruelty, but through this imbalance, through the quiet reality that we're always showing up and really being shown up for. And it's not that people in our lives are malicious. I don't think that. Oftentimes it's just that they're unaware. They've come to expect us to be the strong one, the emotionally literate one, the one who's grounded and wise and affirming and always available. And without meaning to, they begin to take that for granted. But what's even more painful is this. We're the ones that helped to build that expectation. We're the ones who said, I got you, when we didn't. We're the ones who said, it's no problem, when really it was. We're the ones who said, of course I'm okay, I'm good, when truly we're far from it. And now we don't know how to undo that dynamic. We fear that if we stop being the safe place, then we'll stop being any place in their lives at all. And so we stay, and we keep listening, and we keep giving, and we keep showing up, and silently we wonder if anyone would do the same for us. But here's the raw truth. See, if our connection is dependent on never having needs, this is not connection. If our value is measured by how much we absorb, we're not really seen as people. We're seen more as containers. And if people around us cannot tolerate our pain or our anger or our truth, then they're not in relationship with us. They're actually in relationship with our utility. And this doesn't mean that we cut people off, but it does mean that we tell the truth, first to ourselves, and then slowly and courageously we begin telling this truth to others around us. We begin by naming the imbalance, by acknowledging that being the emotional landing pad has really come at a cost, by admitting that our endless giving isn't always generosity. It's oftentimes fear in disguise. Fear of being unchosen, fear of being too much, fear of being seen and then left. But honesty is the gateway to intimacy, and nothing will ever change until we're honest about what really hurts. See, that honesty doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't need to come with these ultimatums or explosions, but it needs to come. And it can feel, well, here's what it could sound like. It could sound like saying, I realize that I've always been the one that you turn to, but I also need to be able to turn to you as well. Or I love being there for you, but sometimes I feel invisible in this relationship or friendship. See, I want to be known as well, not just needed. See, when you say it these way, these don't sound like accusations. They're more like invitations. Invitations to step into a relationship where everyone gets to be human, not just the people that we care about. And we actually might be surprised. We might be surprised by who accepts these invitations. See, some will lean in. Some will show up in ways that we never thought was possible, and others won't. See, some people will feel uncomfortable, and then they'll shift and they'll fade perhaps, because the version of us that they've come to rely on is changing. And not everyone can actually meet us in our wholeness. See, that's painful. But it's also clarifying. It reveals who's truly capable of intimacy and who's simply drawn to our emotional labor. And the gift on the other end of this grief is this. We begin to reclaim ourselves. We begin to let go of the fear that being seen equals being abandoned. We begin to imagine a life where we're not just useful, but we're also loved. Loved for our softness and our strength. Loved for our humor and our heaviness. Loved not just when we're the landing pad, but also when we're the ones falling as well. See, there's something tragic about being seen as safe, but not sacred. Where you're valued, but you're not cherished, and where you're available, but not prioritized. This happens slowly. And at first, it might feel good to be needed, to be the one that someone cries to or trusts with their heartbreak, their confusion, their secrets. But then when we start realizing that we're only ever the container, not the content of anyone else's care, it begins to hollow us out. And it's a quiet erosion, isn't it? We tell ourselves, this is what love looks like. This is my role. And we convince ourselves that being the anchor means that we can't ask to be held. We start associating connection with service. And then eventually we forget what it's like to be chosen without offering something in return. This is how performance sneaks into these most vulnerable spaces that we hold close. This is how we begin to equate emotional competence with emotional invisibility. Because the more we understand others, the less others feel the need to understand us. The more we adapt to others and their needs, the more they assume that we have none of our own. And the more we regulate ourselves, the more we're left to process everything alone. But here's the thing, this pattern is not sustainable. Not for the heart, not for the nervous system, not for the soul. See, eventually our internal well will run dry. And the exhaustion that we feel isn't just physical, it's quite existential. It's the weight of always holding and always helping and always holding back. It's the grief of realizing that we've actually trained people to love us in one direction. And that grief is valid, and it deserves to be honored as well. Because for many of us, becoming the emotional landing pad wasn't just a conscious decision. It was a survival strategy, a response to a dynamic in our childhood where the only way that we could feel safe was by managing other people's emotions. A learned belief that love was earned through usefulness and not through presence, not through your essence. And what we've been calling as supportive or selfless is often this mask of hypervigilance. See, we anticipate needs before they're ever spoken. We soothe tension before it even erupts. And we minimize our own pain so that others won't feel guilty or uncomfortable. And this isn't empathy, that's more of a trauma response. But here's this gentle truth. It's not our fault that we learned these strategies. And it's also not our fault that people got comfortable with us staying that way. But it is our responsibility now to begin reclaiming what we lost in the process. And that begins by breaking the pattern of silent erasing, by recognizing that intimacy isn't just about being there for others. It's actually really about being known in return. It's about reciprocity and not martyrdom. It's about this slow and sacred act of letting ourselves need without the mask of competence. And this requires terrifying courage, because once we stop being this emotional sponge, then we don't know who we are. We don't know how it is to sit in a room and not feel like we have to fix the atmosphere. We don't know how to speak from our pain instead of analyzing someone else's pain. That's, I think, where this work begins. It starts with naming the part of us that's terrified, that will be abandoned if we stop performing emotional safety. It starts with holding the younger version of ourselves who never really felt safe to even fall apart. It starts with whispering, you don't have to earn love anymore. You actually get to be real now. And slowly, we learn to let silence be okay. We learn to let someone else be uncomfortable. We learn to sit with our own feelings without rushing to make them palatable. See, this is not about becoming selfish, it's about becoming whole. Because when we deny our own emotional reality, like to be someone else's refuge, we're not really practicing love. We're actually reenacting codependency. And the cost is too high. It costs us our vitality. It costs us our sense of self. It costs us this joy of mutual connection, the kind where both people get to be soft and seen and held and heard. So, what does this healing really look like, though? Sometimes it's setting boundaries that feel like a betrayal to others, but are actually acts of self-trust. Sometimes it's saying, I'm not available for this right now, without feeling guilt. Sometimes it's resisting the urge to fix someone else's storm, and instead tending to our own weather system. And over time, something begins to shift. Something happens where we stop being everyone else's go-to, and we start, in essence, becoming our own. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And not to isolate as much as to recalibrate. Because the goal isn't to harden, it's to heal. To rediscover the part of us that existed before we learned that love had to be earned through emotional labor. To reawaken the truth that we are allowed to take up space even when it's messy, even when it's inconvenient, and to realize that the kind of connection that we crave will never be found in the performance of caretaking, but in this authenticity of mutual vulnerability. See, we often don't notice the cost of always being the one that people run to until we realize that we have no one else to run to ourselves. And so we scroll through our contacts, we hesitate to type that message, and we wonder if anyone is there who would receive us with the same tenderness that we so generously and freely gave away. And that's the fracture that breaks so many of us. It's not the weight of helping others, but it's this quiet pain of not being helped in return. This is where the loneliness disguises itself the best, not in absence, but in asymmetry. Because we're not alone in this literal sense. We're actually surrounded, and we're appreciated, and we're praised for being grounded and wise and dependable. But we know deep down that none of those things means that we're truly being held. And perhaps that's why so many of us are reaching this tipping point. It's the day that we cry and realize no one noticed it. The moment that we spoke up and realized that people heard us, but they didn't quite listen. The night that we were overwhelmed and realized that there is no emotional landing pad for us to land on. This is disorienting. And so we begin questioning everything. Is something wrong with me for wanting more? Am I too much? Am I too needy? Am I too different from who they thought I was? Have I just been useful but never actually loved? And in this raw space, there's a deeper truth that starts to surface, and that is being the strong one is not strength, especially when it's performed out of fear. Being the listener isn't always intimacy when we're never allowed to speak. Being the peacemaker is not integrity when it means that we're abandoning ourselves in the process. See, real strength includes softness, and real listening, it goes two ways. And real peace, it comes when we're no longer required to carry everyone else's weight just so that we're welcome in the room. So here's what reclaiming our wholeness could look like. It can look like saying no and trusting that we're still worthy. It can look like asking for help and letting ourselves be witnessed in our mess. It can look like choosing fewer and deeper relationships instead of being everyone's safe place. See, it's a season of truth-telling now, and that truth will most likely cost some of us our roles and our reputations and even our rhythms. But what we are gaining in return, that's where freedom lives. Freedom to let others manage their discomfort without rushing to rescue them. Freedom to express our needs without shame. Freedom to be ordinary and human and incomplete and still deeply deserving of love. We weren't born to be emotional utilities. We were actually born to connect, to reveal, to be transformed in the space between giving and receiving. And that means grieving the old shape that we used to take once upon a time, the one that bent and contorted to become this balm for everyone else. See, that shape kept us safe once, but it also kept us small. And now we are allowed to expand into our own desires, to expand into boundaries that speak on our behalf, to expand into relationships that honor our full humanity and not just our usefulness. So here's what we start remembering when we stop playing the role. We are not burdens. We are not too much. We're not made to disappear so that others can feel whole. We actually get to bring the same devotion inward as well to ourselves. the same listening, the same tenderness, the same reverence that we've always given away without even asking for it in return. And we start to be able to say, I matter as well. And we stop apologizing for saying that. We start saying, this is what I need. And we stop shrinking around it. We start saying, I'm no longer here to fix everything for everyone. And we stop confusing burnout with belonging. Because here's the most radical act, I think, of all. And that is, we give ourselves permission to rest, to be known, to not have it all together. We build friendships where mutuality is the norm, not the exception. And we choose partners who don't just depend on us, but also show up for us. And little by little, we become the kind of person that we've always longed for. Not just to others, but also to ourselves. So for any one of you who's listening in today, who's felt invisible, especially in their strength, who's felt unacknowledged in their support or unseen in their exhaustion, I want this episode to be your mirror. See, you're not here just to be useful. You're here to be loved. You're here to be safe and to be seen and to be strong and soft. You're here to be a refuge for others and also a home for yourself. Because you are worthy of care that flows towards you, not just through you. And maybe this might be the beginning of you learning to receive that kind of care. I hope it's so. Let me know if this episode landed or resonated in any way. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. I'll see you in the next episode.